All right, welcome everybody to this very exciting special session of SEDA today. Thank you for being here on exam week, and welcome to all our guests. We do not have a formal agenda today because the session is pretty much entirely given over to the Transforming General Education Task Force for them to deliver their report. I did want to note there's some discussion about the possibility of voting on waiving the 2-week rule and improving some university studies courses, but there were some questions about that, about some of the materials in the drive, so we're just going to come back to that in winter. So all we are doing today is just working on this. So with that, I'm going to basically hand it over to Dale.
Are these lights dim at all? I mean, I hate to shut them off and get into that kind of a thing, but if they dim a bit, yeah, that make it easier for everyone to see. Brittany, can you see that? I know you can. Well, thank you for having us. Come down.
You have a lot of requirements.
I know, I just saw this. I'm distracted. I'm doing a Donald Trump thing here, and I feel like I'm testifying. I'll just walk into it, because that's what I think is going to end up happening when I walk into it. So, welcome to our, what looks like it's going to be a quarterly report of what the Task Force on Transforming General Ed is going to be doing. And so, this is going to be a fast part of the presentation, and then I'm going to do a little bit, Brittany's going to talk about students, and I'm going to come back and finish it up, and then we're going to have a period for question and answers, because I'm thinking there might be a question out there.
Yeah, we're going to take away the fruits and they won't be throwing it.
Well, that's why I was going to dim the lights even more, but I thought, nah, I'll just try to dodge. So basically, starting off, I was just going to kind of talk about this and layer this over as our directives for the fall term and what we were supposed to be doing. And part of this is really getting at, I went to Chad's students' presentation about the Balkans, and I was amazed at what it was like, because the students were talking about doing this trail and there were landmines everywhere. And I'm like going, you say your students off to landmines? Most of us are doing that metaphorically, but he really actually had his students going through Bosnia and Albania and all this, and Slovenia, and walking through landmines. And at times, this could feel like you're walking through landmines, because you never know what's going to come out of the discussions that we're doing in the work when you put, I don't know how many of us, there's 32 of us in this, peripherally involved with a couple, and students that come in and out, so we get a lot of feedback from a lot of people. And I think what's really interesting is the landmines don't necessarily blow you up, they change your perspective. And I'm hoping that the ultimate thing that we do is we change our perspective a little bit about what we have been doing, and so Kendall doesn't feel like this is what, 5th, or what'd you say it was?
About the 5th, I think.
Yeah, the 5th time that he's gone through a revision of the general education program. So, and starting off, I wanted to say this much. Our fall term, one of the directives, the overlay of this, is that we're not looking at the models to how we were going to deliver this, what's my course look like, what's your course look like, what's your department look like through this. It was really to look at laying a foundation for where we go. What kinds of learning outcomes do we want our students to be able to leave this institution with and carry forth through the rest of their lives? So with that in mind, these are where we went. So the first thing was we had taken advantage of the PLCs. We already had that in the process. So we looked at the PLC information. We had articles. We still have articles. We have articles versus articles versus articles kind of coming in where we keep looking at what's going on. But we also wanted to take a look, and I really thought this was important, is looking at what have we been doing, what are we doing, what's successful, and what do people feel is successful. And then later on we're going to get a little bit of what's not successful. But the main thing is once we got going, we wanted to hear from the students and the faculty on this campus, what's going on here, and what people thought here. And so, in an effort to do that, the first thing we did is we went, as many of you may have seen or talked, we went to all the divisions and programs and asked for feedback on the current learning goals. And we basically did this in terms of 3 questions. There's a simplified version. What do we currently have that's, do you believe are still essential to where we're going? Then, which one of them do you believe need to be revised, or how would you revise them? And then last, what's missing and what kinds of ways can we actually input the things that are missing? And most of us felt that things were missing. And so we went off and we asked faculty to take a look at all those things, and we got feedback from about 16 different departments. And several times, I'm not picking on any individual department or anything, but several times, most of the things that were coming back not looking at our learning goals, not looking at the foundation, but what's wrong. So we kept hearing, you need to do this, you need to do this, we need to get rid of this, we need to do this. And it wasn't talking about what's the foundation. I mean, if you can imagine creating a building that you start with the ceiling. Doesn't work that way, and we had that, but you know what the wallpaper would be like if we did this? So where's the landmines? So that was one of the landmines we ran into in some of the initial feedback, and I unfortunately had to go back in some places and say, actually, could you refocus what your feedback was into the learning goals? And so we did that, and we got a list of learning goals out of that. The next thing we did is we put a lot on Brittany and Jason and Anue and Sarah to kind of look at what do the students think about what they're getting. And it was framed in a lot of the same questions, but they used a survey and then asked, what are the learning goals that were important? And at that point, we had an initial list of 11 learning goals, which I'll come back to. But I'll turn this over to Brittany.
So I'm just going to pass this around so you can view it kind of at your own leisure. That is going to be like at the very end of the PowerPoint that we're going to talk about it, but it's basically like the feedback of students, more of like their like actual word description opposed to we ask kind of like yes or no responses. Yeah.
And they do have that in the drive.
Oh, you do? Okay, great. Well, they don't have to look at the printed copy, but I wasted paper. I know, I tried to slow it down. So basically, an overview of the survey is we had 232 students answer the survey. We asked a couple questions to just like understand some of maybe the responses of like, you'll see in some of the feedback someone talks about being a non-traditional student or being a transfer student, how the gen eds affect them, or being a veteran and how coming into higher education with a lot of background experience sometimes they feel their experience is not necessarily as targeted as traditional college students. So I just thought you'd like to know that 48% identified as a traditional student. I would warn against this anyway, that sometimes people don't know if they're non-traditional or not. It's such a broad category. Transfer students are 28%, non-traditional is 18%, and honors college is 5%, basically. So the first round of questions, which is the majority of the survey, question 5 through 15, all of the learning goals that we were brainstorming about, we wanted to see if students were already getting those, even though we may not have been already targeting trying to teach them. So basically the format of the question was, please rate the following learning goal to fit your own experience in university studies. Through the A through J has worked to improve your blank the learning goal by the description that Andrew mainly formatted to help students break down and understand what the learning goal was. So obviously an example you can see there with communication or financial literacy to help them understand, are you actually getting this in your gen eds currently? So I'm going to go through the pictures of the actual question responses. Basically all of them, students said that they were on average receiving them through their gen eds at some percentage. The only one that basically they primarily said they weren't receiving was financial literacy. So for communication, it was agreed that they were receiving this in their gen ed experience. Information literacy, agreed. Again, a reminder that in the previous questions there was a definition at the top so they understood exactly what we were looking for them, just so These there. Critical thinking, agree. Creativity and innovation, agree and somewhat agree were the top choices. Cultural competency, agree. I talked about this in the Gen Ed task force, but I do want to kind of warn against it here that we didn't really ask if they were a student of color answering this question, and this is obviously like a very summarized view. I would say that the answer is different for perhaps a non-student of color, that their perspective they're receiving cultural, as we've changed it to cultural capacity now, they might think that they're getting a great experience here because they come from maybe rural Oregon and not getting as much as they would here. But I think if we ask students of color specifically, it may not be as much of agree. And I do see this because I work at the MRC, and I know a lot of students do explain that they'd like to see more of that push here. They'd like to see ethnic studies and more classes targeting this knowledge for their white peers to benefit their experience here. So I just want to clarify that because the results to us may show that it's, you know, they're getting it, but to what exact capacity? Financial literacy, they strongly disagree and neither agree nor disagree that it's there. I do have a section in some of the pass around document where students are saying they want that. Granted, they're saying they want a class on how to buy a house and how to do taxes. I don't know how we do that. I personally don't know if I want a class about how to buy a house because I rent a townhouse. So like, that's not necessary to me right now, but obviously students are craving some type of direction here from higher education on life, you know, especially when we're balancing high loans now. Maybe that's something they're looking for, you know. If they're going to have to deal with this, can you have direction on how I'm going to manage this at least? Computer literacy and technology, neither agree nor disagree. Another one that I talked with a lot of business students about this, it depends on the actual major you're in if you're achieving this. I know in some you may not be working with a lot of like Excel and computer programs, but others like the business department and obviously like ENDA and others, like you are centered around this. So I think this is more just asking if you want that in the Gen Eds for everybody. Civic engagement, they somewhat agree and neither agree nor disagree. Ethical and sustainable living, agree and somewhat agree. Career development, agree, somewhat agree. Human development and emotional intelligence, I think it is, agree and somewhat agree. And then we asked them at the very end to kind of get the real student perspective of what they want now. We asked them if they were receiving those learning goals currently, and now we want to know what they're most important that they'd like to see with this work being done. So as you can see, everyone kind of thought, and there is I think a quote in there that someone said all of these are important, and I think that they're just maybe not being as tried as well at the moment, but they do see all of them being important. The top 6 were critical thinking, which is 14% of the survey, career development, communication, human development and emotional intelligence, creativity and innovation, and financial literacy were their top 6 overall.
It might be obvious, but I'm just missing it. How many were they allowed to pick in that?
5.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Probably 7.
Yeah. So the question was, choose your top 5 learning goals.
Okay.
Is there any questions on that specifically before I talk about the deal?
So then, did you want to speak to this, Brittany? This was, go ahead.
Yeah, that's basically what I passed around is we asked them anything else you'd like us to consider. Similar to what Dale said of like faculty coming back with more model-wise, students obviously came back with I'm paying too much and other things that we are not controlling here. I did slim down the question of anyone saying something like really not relevant or the normal no. So that is pretty much everything that was given back from students, and there's a wide range of things to consider, but there is a lot that I think can be useful to this committee for us to keep in mind when we're there. So I definitely think it's really important. I know the students that also reviewed it thought it was really good feedback from the student perspective, so I think it's a really interesting document to revisit.
You said there were like almost 200 comments or something?
Yeah, everyone basically made a comment. I mean, there was like a few no's, but as you can see, it's 4 pages, so there's a decent amount that actually were some genuine feedback from students.
Thank you. So then we went to the general education learning goals that we currently have, what's needed and what's missing from faculty. When this came in, I kind of wish we did a Qualtrics survey because then it would have put all that together. But the responses were much more random than that. And so Andrew helped by having his student Sarah come in and organizing all that faculty information, which then brought us to this point, which we created 11 different learning goals. And these were the learning goals that were used in the student survey when they had to pick which ones they felt were the 5 most important. Did they get any of these? And so as you can see, communication, information literacy, critical thinking and reasoning are there. The financial literacy is one that at one point when we got into small groups, we talked a little bit about as being something that, wouldn't that be something that you would put in a separate category or in another umbrella category like quantitative reason? But I like the way Andrew expressed this, that he felt, and I think many of us felt, that we have a moral imperative to actually deal with this financial literacy because students are having so much more debt than most of us ever had when we went through school. So it was something that it's part of the helping a student be have the career development and the personal wherewithal to how to succeed in life, and that financial literacy became a big one. And then creativity and innovation, the career management, the technological fluency, emotional intelligence, cultural capacity. We didn't want to use cultural, what was the first one? Now I'm forgetting.
Competency.
Yeah, competency, because the general feeling was, how would you ever know if you're really culturally competent? And so there was a lot of pushback in that by several people. So capacity seems to be a much better thing. We'll talk more about capacity in just a second. And then civic engagement and ethical and sustainable living. So then we took these learning goals and we were trying to kind of capture some way of speaking about what we were doing in a bigger way. And what happened was we came up with the word capacities. And that comes from Wiggins and McTee, and Clay brought this up, and then, you know, I had heard about this too because I knew Wiggins and McTee and I read Understanding by Design long ago. And basically capacity is the ability to transfer our knowledge and skills the ability to transfer our knowledge and skill effectively involves the capacity to take what we know and use it creatively, flexibly, fluently, and in different settings or problems on our own. And I think it was a really nice way of saying that, and it really does take these larger umbrella categories and puts it in a really nice way. And then, once we did that, we took the capacities, and if you think of these capacities in another way, instead of just learning outcomes or something, there are a lot of different things, and Wiggins and McTee talk about knowledge, skills, and dispositions in here. And so we came up with 6 of them. And that was communication, critical thinking, creativity and innovation. Technically, that almost sounds like 2, but they're both different ways of saying the same thing, and intentionally. Collaboration, cultural capacities, and career and professional development. Almost like the 6 C's. But that's almost marketable, but I'm not sure that was our intention. And then to break those down a little bit, the communication one, we came up with the definition, which I think was all passed out to everybody, but I'll just go through it real fast again, was engage in effective and impactful communication through writing, speaking, listening, which is a new one. We've never put that in with communication, so we put that in there. Dialogue, visual images, media, networked, and digital tools. Then we had critical thinking, was engaged with ideas logically, holistically, scientifically, and creatively by effectively accessing, analyzing, and evaluating sources of information, media messages, factual claims, and data to understand and solve problems. And if you're getting an inkling that there's a lot packed in these definitions, there's supposed to be a lot packed in the definitions because there ultimately will be a lot packed beneath those definitions. These are right up at the top order in terms of thinking of where we're going. Creativity and innovation was explore, expand, and contextualize one's own capacity for creation and innovative problem solving. Then we had collaboration, which is cooperating with others to address ethical, political, civic, and sustainable issues and implement meaningful change toward a common goal through effective teamwork and leadership. Cultural capacity was navigate interconnected institutions and social structures to work effectively, equitably, and respectfully with diverse groups encompassing sustainable behavior, global and intercultural fluency, and world languages. And then lastly, career and personal development. Effectively explore career opportunities, build relevant experience, develop financial and technological fluencies, and articulate skills, strengths, and values as they relate to academic, professional, and personal purpose. So those were the 6, and then at this point, this is where we ended on Friday. Actually, it sort of eked into the weekend a little bit, some of it. Thank you for taking that final document and making it nice. But what's next is dig deeper into those capacities. So we'll be drilling down into those capacities and probably incorporating learning goals. Some do, some old, some are working, some aren't. Some have never been done before. And then once we dig deeper, we're also going to be starting to look at models for delivery. And we've refrained from the models because that's the tendency, is to jump into the model, and that gets into what classes are going where and how many credits are going to be. So we're looking into, for a gen ed program, what are we required by the state to provide and those kinds of things. So we need to know what our capacity for doing that is. So if we went, we're not going to have one, are we allowed to do that? No, we're not necessarily. So we have to go to that point and see what are the possibilities we can go through from there. And that's the PowerPoint part. Now for questions, answers, comments. Steve?
Yeah, real fast. Was there any intention why you put effectively an adverb in front of an action for the last capacity, but not for the first 5? Was there something special about the 6th one?
No, there might have been another effect. No, maybe not.
No, I got them right here. So.
No, it's because we were wordsmithing at the tail end, and it probably we haven't brought out our chisels in the stone yet, which to cut them into, so they're permanent fixtures in a foundation. But quite honestly, it was a little bit. Our last meeting was like we did get a landmine, so to speak, that we were going in a certain place, and then we sort of blew it up and reconfigured it, and which I think was quite successful in the long run, despite, it just seemed like you were going into the unknown for a little bit. But I think where we got to is a really good place.
I was just going to add, I know last time we met, Linda and I talked about the meeting that we had with Governor Kate Brown, and something she did call out was that employers are feeling that students are coming into the workforce not with the skills that they're looking for. And so when I said that this is something that Jen was working on, I would really like to highlight that students want that career development, and employers in Oregon want that as well. So I definitely think this is something new to colleges that I'm not seeing that most people come out of school getting, that they fall short in then when they get to their careers. And if we can develop that now, I think that would be a really great thing for SAU to have on the table for students coming in.
So in answer, Steve, no. We could take that one out or put it in the other ones. We hope that everybody, if you are using these capacities or any learning outcome, theoretically, we talked about creating learning outcomes and proficiencies when you're down at the proficiency level. And technically, if you're doing any proficiency, which comes down where you're into a class where you take the idea that students will be able to do something, technically, once it's into the classroom setting, it's going to be, given this, the students will be able to do whatever that is, and they'll be able to do it to this level. That would be a true proficiency. But that's never been done in our previous proficiencies either, and it's mainly because somebody in their classroom, when they take one of those proficiencies and apply it in their classroom, they will create the condition and they will create what they think is the proficiency level. Am I getting too education-y in there?
So there
Yeah.
aren't gonna be proficiencies?
Yes, there will be, yes, we're way above that at this point.
Okay, because it sounded like you were
So-
saying that people developing the courses would be designing the
No,
proficiencies.
no, that's not at all. We have the capacities up here, ultimately we'll have learning goals feeding those capacities and proficiencies feeding those different learning goals. And in those proficiencies, they won't be articulated into a specific, effectively doing, that's what I was getting at, is the response about being effectively. Technically, that's down at how effective somebody is, that's something we'll be at a classroom level. Joe?
So I might have missed this, but you said 16 programs or departments provided feedback to faculty, but did you not summarize that feedback? Like-
Yeah, I didn't say, what we did with the feedback, we were talking about learning goals only at that point, so we had our 9 current ones in there, and then we were asking which ones are working, which ones needed to be revised, and which ones weren't present at all, what needed to be brought into there. And the summary of the 11 that we have here were from that. And the only thing I would say, other than that, most people were saying, we have a lot of really good ones now. And so there was an adherence to some of those.
Yeah, can I respond to that as well?
Yeah. And then Kimball and then.
Yeah, kind of one of the things that Dale highlighted before is that the program feedback, I would say, was much more variable in form than, for instance, student feedback who answered the question. And so it was very hard to create a summary of that
Okay,
feedback
that's right.
because it was really all over the place.
At the risk of sounding like the math curmudgeon, I didn't see much in the way of quantitative in there. I saw logic and I saw data. Is that to your sense that would be a capacity?
That, I think it's gonna, that kinds of piece would fall under that, and also innovations probably, where the sciences will be over into innovative kind of thing, where we think of creativity as only being like playing a musical piece or something like that sometimes. I loved when Chad and I get into these conversations about hiking a trail and how much research is involved in hiking a trail versus where you think you're just walking off and going into the woods and walking, and if you do that enough, you'll hit a landmine, believe me. So research, that being there, but there was a piece at the end, there was a number 12 that kind of eked in on the last day, and that was quantitative reasoning again. Those are the things those aren't done yet. We're not at that point of filling out how we fill these out exactly. But, yeah. So you're fine. And was it, Brian, did you have your hand up?
Was there any discussion on, well, first of all, great work. That's a hell of a lot of work, by the way. And I thought it was kind of cool, although I was a little disappointed that you said it wasn't intentional that you had the 6 C's. I thought that was completely intentional. But was there any discussion on the difference between a capability and a capacity and a skill?
A capacity, generally as McTeague and Wiggins and McTeague talk about it, the capacity has skills, knowledge, and dispositions. And so you might have heard this language before. We were talking about it in in what Vicki was doing a year or two ago, longer. But it's a different way of talking about things than standard old goal outcomes and proficiencies. So it's a little bit different. Did that answer that?
Yeah, I was just wordsmithing the word.
Can I just add to that? So the idea is that students would then, some on the general education task force as well, but the idea is that it's not finished, right? When students graduate, that they still have the ability to continue to grow and enhance themselves, and that's the capacity language.
Right. There is a definition of capacity that I found troublesome a little bit sometimes, because it's like you have a maximum capacity, and that takes exactly opposite of what Conlon's saying, and it's not what we're saying. You don't come in with a bowl and we're gonna fill it up. Actually, the one big conversation we've had a lot of is, speaking of bowls, we like to call it buckets. And, you know, the idea of putting our courses in buckets, and we, as a student graduating, they know what courses they took, but they don't necessarily know what proficiencies they have and what what different capacities that they actually have. We don't talk about it. So we took 3 math courses, or we took this and did that. We're not talking about quantitative literacy at that point. We're just talking about our math courses. We're not talking about creativity because we took a music course.
This may be way too early in the game, but I'm wondering about transferability. Are you thinking ahead as to how students might be able to transfer in?
No. I say that not flippantly, but no. Our directive was not to think like that yet. And that's hard. In fact, Friday, like at probably 4:15 or so, we were talking about that very conversation, and we felt dangerously close into falling into the trap of how would we deliver this? How are we going to do this? And then, no, don't worry about that at this point. Let's not get into that conversation, because that'll throw us off. We're trying to set a good foundation, and that can work by figuring out a way of delivering it first is like putting the cart before the horse, we felt. And we were actually directed. I mean, I told Sue I was going to do this at some point. I was going to say, Sue said, don't do that. Don't be thinking like that. Some of this is going to be up to her office to figure out how that will work. But we'll hammer that into.
And Jesse and I were talking. Isn't it the 7 seeds? Like sail with the 7 seeds?
That's the wrong seed. We would have to bring. Yeah, that would be C communication and C critical thinking.
I think a semester in C, and then
There we go.
Okay, let's find another C word. You're
Calculus.
Yes.
Retention solved.
We'll spell quantitative reasoning with a C, right?
That's
Yeah, Chad.
So
There's our C.
Yeah, there's the chat right there. I look at these C's and I'm thinking, and I'm looking at this question about making the connection with people that are prepared for the workforce. Those are all, and get back to another way of looking at transferability, those are transferable skills. And one of the things we really concentrate on out of Adventure Leadership is how each one of the things we're learning is a transferable skills that you can apply to any job. And I don't think we really concentrate sometimes on teaching and making it explicit that this can relate to this. Because we have such a compartmentalized way of looking at the world, and we've been taught this way throughout education to, well, I took this music class, but it didn't have anything to do with English class. If we can teach them how to see the interconnectedness between the classes, then they can maybe start to see the interconnectedness of their jobs. I mean, I literally just had a student was talking about food systems, and she's like, well, I don't remember learning something on food system. Like, and then I went through all the things that we did with food. And she was like, oh yeah, we did all that stuff. But sometimes, I mean, you almost need, if they can't walk out of your class making that connection, I don't think you should teach another thing until they've made that connection, period. Because you're just giving them information. If they can't go out in the world and use it, until they can see that connection, just stop your class and then make sure you get that connection, and then they go out in the world. They should be able to go out and talk intelligently about these 6 C's in any of our degrees. Because I don't want to get to this point where we're like teaching these skills that are not going to be robot proof, correct? We're teaching robot proof skills that are going to be eventually, some of these skills are going to be dead skills in a little, very soon. So it's this idea of making those connections, and I don't see sometimes we're kind of trying to get the content in there and skipping over these connections with the bigger world.
So is that the 7C connection?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that connection piece, yeah.
Kind of to follow up on Chad's point, and a little bit in response to what Kimball was talking about, where's quantitative, that I do know that in that sort of last conversation about what these capacities should be, there's a real focus on making sure that each of these capacities was cross-disciplinary and not based in a bucket, right? There's no one capacity you look and say, well, that's clearly a STEM, that's clearly arts over here, but that these outcomes were things that we said really spread the entire breadth of what general education should be. So that, I think that's kind of goes to what Chad's saying too, that like, each of our disciplines live throughout these capacities.
Systems thinking, and I'm not seeing that there, but that C, the connection piece, yeah, they're doing our 7C right there.
So I'll go to another C, which is piggybacking on Chad, another C. But over the last
You're a B, careful.
Linda came and spoke to all the programs, and at the end you were talking about, forward thinking of what we want to do. And I drove down to Klamath Falls, Klamath Community College on Tuesday to visit with criminology students. And by the way, they're getting a lot of money because they have amazing buildings inside there. And I tried to say, come to Taylor Hall, where but when I went on a little tour with the criminology program lead there, they were collaborating outside of just criminal justice. I mean, they were doing work with chemists, and the psychology was doing work with chemistry and with criminology. And so to kind of piggyback on the dive deeper into collaboration, as I was thinking of what SOU can do differently is, that collaboration, that connection between how do these different disciplines work together. And I don't know if that's a team teaching mechanism or a sub-program, but I mean, there is that kind of imbalance where, even in my class, if I'm teaching the theories of criminal behavior, they're in the class and then they leave, and I try to extend their worldview even to another criminology class, and it's kind of different. So I'm just wondering if collaboration among programs would be a nice deeper dive into collaboration, because right now it's talking about teamwork, and so there's teamwork at all kinds of levels, and so even at the university, if we get teamwork among the programs, I think that would be cool. I think it's an ideal setting would be, as Jim Hatton said, it would be nice to see these learning goals that you're contemplating. That was much earlier, it was like 4 or 5 sessions ago, but I'd like to see it go throughout the curriculum more, weave its way throughout the curriculum. And we always talk with university studies goals that the 4 foundational goals were more like weaving their way throughout the curriculum. You had information literacy, critical thinking, and oral and written communication going throughout there. And those were easier to talk about than when we got off into looking at history, or not history, but social studies and humanities and sciences in the exploration. Explorations did not seem like explorations in a lot of ways. It seemed like going into your divisions, and it seemed like a hearkening back to the 18-18-18 model, where you took 18 credits in each of those 3 areas, and that was your gen ed model, and that was a liberal education. And if you look at that, that would be exactly why an employer might say, you're not teaching your students the skills I need to be successful in the workplace or in their personal lives and things like that. So there was a strong case for going into these other kinds of learning outcomes that weren't so discipline specific.
Can you elaborate on what type of skills these employers are thinking we're not teaching, or not us per se, but universities are not? I mean, I would think of critical thinking, communication are crucial no matter what career. So what specifically are they saying the students coming to them don't have?
I'm going to give Brittany.
Yeah, the HEC actually did an Oregon talent assessment that was about basically what employers are looking for. I don't have it right now, but I believe it's on the HEC. I'm looking at with it. Yeah, and they basically put out different things. From what I'm remembering, if you have more clarification, I think it was like teamwork and like communication, better communication and critical thinking. But it's a pretty big packet that they put together that the HEC is looking for these like talents. I think it was put together in 2018.
You know, this is pretty common to hear this kind of stuff from employers. There was that study, I think maybe it was Gallup, but anyway, they said, if you ask presidents and provosts, they say 96% will say, absolutely, we're teaching these critical employment skills. And if you ask employers, like 11% say that the people they're hiring actually have these skills. So part of it is the connection piece. We are teaching things, but we aren't helping students understand the applicability and helping them have that sort of metacognition that allows them to describe to an employer what they actually have learned. And so I think it's really more in a communication and labeling. One thing that at my previous institution, there was I think it was a history faculty member who sort of took the lead and had her learning, we would call them capacity here, although these were more at the course level. But we had these learning outcomes for the whole institution, and then she applied them to her course. And then, so each course said, here's the learning outcomes, here are the workplace skills, and these are the actual jobs. So it was like a table on her syllabus that said, you know, you're learning research, here's a workplace skill that's relevant to that, and by the way, here's a job, if you get a degree in history, that is applicable to this. So it was in every, the goal would have been then to have every syllabus sort of translate, make that translation and application very explicit for the students. So I don't think it's not that we're teaching them, we're not necessarily getting them to the level that they might like every student that they employ, and we're not labeling it explicitly enough, I think.
Andrew, you want to say something?
Yeah, Carol, I think it gets to sort of a metacognitive issue. You know, the students aren't forming the web between all these pieces, and I think one of the things we've sort of realized on the task force is that that instruction begins in the very design of the curriculum. Right now, they talk about strands. I need to fill this strand. Yeah, and one of the things I think Max Burks, who's not here today, he was really intrinsic to forming the career and personal development. He brought the phrasing here that they need to articulate skills, strengths, and values as they relate to academic, professional, and personal purpose. And so that, I think that was, again, a really key component of what we see as needing to happen, not only in the gen ed, but once they move into majors, right, is to be able to say, I've learned this, and it's a strength in this way, and it pertains to my values and my purpose in this way, and be able to communicate that to employers.
The other place I've heard of this going way back into the 2005 era of the LEAP outcomes, and you know that whole report that was done with a study by AAC&U looking at what employers value, and a lot of those outcomes from there kind of linger on today, and they're very similar because they're not responding to a direct skill that somebody needs out there, like you need to be able to program a computer. Other thoughts, comments, questions? Yeah, Matt.
The student survey, was there anything that the task force found surprising or validating from the results?
I'll let anybody respond from that's a member of the committee. I can take a shot at it.
I was in following up, I was wondering, do you feel that the student survey was in connection to the 6 capacities that you came up with? Was there a correlation to the students' responses to fit into the capacities that were created?
Well, I would say this is, I wanted to speak to this one just for diamonds that started coming out, but I think it really did because, Brittany was dragging me into the capacity on that thing. She said, I want to vote that we do this. And I said, I'm coming to that. But, you know, I think it actually does speak to the fact that it was responding to students, because the students don't want the idea of looking at strands and buckets. And because we can't walk out of here going, so what did you learn at SOU? And then you start citing courses, and that's not, it's how we speak about what we've learned. And we're not speaking, we don't even as faculty talk about the skills we're trying to teach. And I know everybody in here, in one way or another, has taught creativity before. Every single one of you. There's not one of you that can say, yeah, we're not teaching in the way that a theater student or somebody in choral would do it or something like that. We're doing it differently. But every time somebody comes, a student comes to me and has worked with a professor, and I remember Chad sending a student to me, and that student is trying to figure out where to find the research for their topic. Totally creative, totally innovative, because how you're going to speak about it is all about creativity. So we have these skills, but we don't speak in that way. So I think it is addressing the students' need to actually be able to transfer the skills they actually pick up in here and be able to speak about it. And this is a soapbox I've been on. Some people who know me would have heard this one, but I always envision a student walking out of here going to a job interview, and when the person asks them next to somebody else from another institution, so I see you went to SOU, what was that like for you? And that student goes, it was great. We actually, you know, and I used to think of it this way, not in these strands, but in the old foundational strand. It was great. We actually were steeped in problem solving, learning how to research things through our information literacy skills, how to critically evaluate information, how to critically think and solve things on a practical method, as well as getting our basic course. So you start talking about the skills you got, as opposed to, yeah, I'm a communication major, I'm an education major, I'm a music major, or so on. It's something I always thought, it really felt good about the direction we started picking up to do this, because I'll tell you, as much as I've worked in this kind of stuff before, this was really difficult. At times, your own innovation is stalled by what I think is the funny line. When I was in school, because as soon as somebody says when I was in school, the next ... after that is always something that isn't necessarily innovative. It's something going back. And when I was in school, the one thing I thought that was really good that I would wish we could continue is the ability to have a course limit like 16 or 18. And after you go past that, you get them free, whatever you take. So if you take 22 hours, if you can get approved to do that, you wouldn't pay those extra hours of credit. So that way you could do something like take a tennis course like I did. That would be mine when I was in school, but that's... Oh.
Yeah, I would say most of this wasn't surprising to me because I'm a student and we like chit-chat with each other, but surprising. But actually what was surprising to me is the first round of surveys was just through the Student Senate, and it was the first draft me and my co-partner Jason Rabe had made of the survey, was more asking like those questions of like, what are you getting now out of the courses, right? And we worded it of like the actual strands now and how the strands are labeled. You know, you said I'm supposed to be doing communication, thinking, information literacy, social sciences, you're getting social sciences, humanities. When I was asking students specifically about the strand opposed to those learning goals, they were very quick to just say, I don't know, I can't pull together a class right now in my mind, I can't pull out what I got from the class, I just know I took 302, CCJ, whatever. That's what they know. They don't know what they actually took from it. And when we broke it down more to actual learning goals and their whole experience, they took more out of it, I think. I think that's kind of showed, in my opinion, a little bit of a red flag that maybe we are focusing too more, putting it on those buckets that you only get information literacy in 103, that's it. You can never get it again. Opposed to this model is more that you're going to get this throughout your whole entire gen ed experience. I think that was a really great thing for us to do. Also, I know a big one for a lot of students is it's just confusing. The only reason it's not confusing is DegreeWorks is excellent, and it really helps you piece together your pathway on the Candyland board, and that's about it. And this model breaks it down, yes, to 6 C's. It's a little bit basic, but you get it. You understand what you're trying to take out of the courses, and I think definitely from the voice that we heard in the student survey, that's what they want. They don't want to be paying to be confused or why they're taking the class. So this is one step closer to explaining to someone, hey, we're trying to teach you this. Are you getting it? And I really think that this is a good model. And I didn't push Dale. I parlayed pro said multi-question. I just want to clarify that. We're very professional at the Student Body Senate, so I don't mind all
It was a
the
good push.
I do want to make a point to commend Brittany and the other students. I mean, we had, there were a few that popped in once or twice, and there were 3 to 4 students who have been, I think, almost every single meeting. And they have been very vocal. This has not been a case where it's been a bunch of faculty and students sitting in the corner checking their emails. They've been very engaged, very forceful with faculty about the student perspective, and very professional. And I'm personally very grateful that they were a part of this process.
Yeah, Jason's first presentation about what Brittany did over here was really good. It was sort of a surprise. He was in the library, and I said, do you think you could throw that together for Friday's meeting? That was on like Wednesday evening, and he goes, yeah, I think. I don't know what it'll look like when I do it. And then when he did it, it was like as if he did prepare way longer than he probably would have needed to do. So it was really, really nice. And really what Sarah did in compiling all the faculty information into categories, and Andrew too, helping rework that into something that was, you could get your hands around was good too.
So I just add to this about like the student responses. I think it's really telling the focus on financial literacy, but also in terms of personal and emotional intelligence, right? The ways in which, and I think part of it has to do with who we're getting as students, that we really need to do a better job addressing those issues. And it's really interesting to see how some schools or some programs specifically are addressing that around the country.
Yeah, and I also want to thank Sue and Linda for bringing that group in that was talking about emotional intelligence early in the fall term, because I think that's why some of that lingered into this discussion. I know I brought it up in the library, and others brought it up as well. So that was really, really helpful. Paul.
I was curious actually to ask about emotional intelligence. What does that mean to the students? And maybe Brittany or Joe can respond to this. Like, what exactly is desired?
It's basically looking at skills like empathy, understanding others. You know, it's like there's, what are the 5 basic ones? I mean, I didn't bone up on this, but there's 5 basic skills in emotional intelligence. And empathy is the first one I can think of, and then I'm like getting tongue-tied.
I said everything President Trump isn't.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. But those are the kinds of things we have to unpack that piece in there. And I think just like if we say information literacy, what does that really mean? And I think we have to unpack those.
Just the draft outcome, the definition that, and I forget what we had. There's a website I can send it to you that Matt's brought forward. But the definition of emotional intelligence we worked from that was the capacity for self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. So those are the kinds of things that we were focusing on in that area.
Yeah. Thank you.
I was just going to say, I have a friend who, when they talk about their college experience, they say, I learned critical thinking in college. And that's the neatest thing I've ever heard anyone say. And I'm sure I learned critical thinking in college, but it wasn't posed to me in that way. And it'd be so neat if students said, you know, yeah, I learned critical thinking, here's some examples. I learned collaboration, here's some examples. That really does get into a strong note. Good reflection of
Well, we've always had an outcome-based thing, but we didn't talk about the outcomes. And I think, you know, I hate to use this term because I've already said don't ever use this term, but when I was in school, we never spoke about learning outcomes except in a specific class. And then we never really took those learning outcomes out of that class. So, you know, what was your college education like? I can't express it in scales like that, you know? I mean, I can if I think about it now, but at the time when I graduated, I wouldn't have had that ability to do that, because we didn't talk about it like that. But I wanted to say one last thing, is when I look at the 6 C's, and I look at the learning outcomes that, that came out of, I go back to Prakashan on University Studies. If anybody's been there long enough, they've heard me echo Prakash's words or say them myself or him say my words. It's about getting a liberal arts education. And we always thought of liberal arts as being a mixture of those disciplines, and it's not. This is truly liberal arts when I think about it. That these capacities are really talking about liberal arts in a truly competent way, as opposed to just, you know, putting them in a bucket and then saying, if you mix that bucket around and all those courses in there, that's liberal arts. I don't know what that is. That's like, you know, an institutional stew. Yes?
I was curious if there was any conversation around the tuition model and if that had any effect on the compartmentalizing of students' disconnect. That they pay for this class, they pay for this class, they pay for this class. Is there any conversation about that?
I think that's a present conversation in our minds that, you know, when you think of a student having to take a course, and this comes somewhat in the survey, that there was a lot of conversation from the students that, you know, if you're going to make me take this course and I have to pay for that course and I don't value that course, then there's a problem. And that's a stronger voice than I think, you know, years ago, because the tuition wasn't like what it is now, and the burden is pushed on the students so heavily and their families that it comes back to that, you know, the same moral imperative that the financial literacy is dealing with. So that was one of those things that does eke over, like the model kind of thing that, you know, kind of lingers right behind you, like the elephant in the room in a way, but not in a bad way. I don't think it, you know, I think that is a conversation. If you're going to create a new gen ed program, you're going to create a new program for students, then it has to be more relevant. So if they're paying dollars for it, it has to be like an Ariana Grande concert or something like that.
So it's 4:56. We do have the room for the full Senate session, but I am conscious that this is a finals week meeting. So if there are more questions or comments, I'm happy to keep the session going as needed. But I also, if people feel like they have what they need, we can also wrap it up. So I want to know how people are feeling, if people have a lot more questions, or.
Can we just know a little bit more about like what comes next? Because you said like when the person asked the question about Steve, about effectively, we're like, oh well, we're not wordsmithing yet, you know, that's later. So
Right.
when does that come into it, and when will we see more about the proficiencies and learning goals? Because I thought you guys were going to do models next. No.
Yeah,
Harold.
Yeah.
we actually, in the
Two
process.
models, but that doesn't come without proficiency
Right.
discussions.
In the learning goals that we had created, we had thrown together, this was about 2 or 3 meetings worth of, and then some wordsmithing after that. We formed 3 small groups, and each group took 3 or 4 of trying to create learning outcomes for those big learning goals, the 11 that I showed. If you need them, I can put them back up there if you're not sure what I'm talking about. And so part of the objective there was, can you come up with some learning outcomes for that particular goal and proficiencies that would be accessible down the road? And so we did that, and that's the direction we were going. And then all of a sudden we kind of landmined ourselves into a place where we did talk about the capacities and being able to house this in a much broader category up there, and then go back into the learning goals. So in answer to your question, yes, we would get back to learning goals and where they would fit into those capacities, and they would break down into specific proficiencies, and then those specific proficiencies, you know, in an ideal sense, I would like to see if you're teaching a gen ed course and it has, and you're doing it because it has these kinds of proficiencies in there, they should be in your syllabus. Not like it is today for all those people who teach those courses. And as somebody who's on university studies, I know how it doesn't happen. Because those proficiencies that we're supposed to be doing now, they don't make it into the course where you look at a syllabus. They're not there, they're all about something else. And to me, if I was writing a course for a gen ed program and they had certain proficiencies, I would cheat by taking those and putting them in my course because they're ready-made. So I would just put them in there right away and then I'd create a few extra on my course. So, because that's what I'm supposed to be doing, right? And then if I pass that course on, that next person's gonna know it too. So.
I just have a quick comment
Yeah.
to Melissa's question. So I just want to remind folks that this is not a, it's an iterative process. It's not linear. We have some linear aspects of it, and we're trying to adhere to a sort of high-level timeline. But we have to give ourselves permission to, step back and then step forward. So I think now models are on the table for discussion, and that will also involve proficiency discussions because we have to be able to talk about how we measure and assess as well. So I think the next, if I'm not mistaken, the next big update is sort of at the end of winter term.
Right.
And we have some pretty specific benchmarks that we're trying to achieve.
Right, so I'll come back to this, I know you have your hand up. So there is sort of a charge for us here in this room as well, right? And that is that as the Senate representatives for your programs and divisions or at large, is to kind of have these conversations with the campus, with your programs about what you heard about today. Obviously, the task force is moving forward and it's going to keep doing work, but that doesn't mean that feedback can't come in. And the thing, as Sue said, it is iterative. So there are opportunities to take feedback and say, okay, well, actually, we've got really good feedback here and shift what's happening there. But the task force is moving forward to the next step, but we'll keep considering the feedback as it comes. The other thing is that having sat in on most of these meetings, I think once we get into the proficiencies and really drilling down into details, this is not something that the task force is going to be able to do in isolation. They're going to probably need to start forming some subcommittees with additional input and participants. So be looking for opportunities to say, oh, well, I'm going to jump on this communication subcommittee to help build out those proficiencies. Because there will need to be a lot of participation. I mean, there's a lot of people in that room, but it's still a lot of work. So we'll need some shared participation in that as well.
Yeah, the question in my area, and this may not be the right time for it, so just tell me, has to do with the number of courses and the...
We're looking for more.
We're trying to get it up to like about 100.
I can say that from the very first meeting and pretty much every single meeting, there has been a chorus of people reminding each other that everyone wants to reduce that.
And there are a few of the department comments were like that as well, as about how can we streamline this into something that's more workable, and I think that's also one of our guiding principles is to do that.
And do you want specific comments directed to you now about that? Not this second, but...
Yeah, right this minute.
I have people that are coming to me and wanting to, I sent you some of that.
I certainly wouldn't, take the email and just dump it. I'll take it if you have that. I'll use it as we need it, and I'll distribute it. In terms of models, what's next in the terms of models is that I think right now I went through all our readings and I think I had about 5 or 6 articles plus the PLC report that talked about models. And in an ideal sense, as I break that down, what I would like to do with it is in some ways form a schemata of all the different kinds of things that people have done around the campus. And this would range anything from no departments, somebody has one like that, to no gen ed. Okay, so those could be 2. But the no gen ed comes into like your vocational school and you're not doing what we're doing. So that's too far off of there, but somewhere in there, there's a whole range of things, and I would like to kind of see that. And if there's a schemata that we can pull out of it that we can update you with halfway and send you a paper, I'd be glad to do any of that. So it's not like next winter, all of a sudden, I dump a big bunch of information on the table.
Dennis has his hand up and then
And Elena does too.
Yeah, I was just, I'm glad you mentioned something about extra feedback here, because, I mean, when you said you had your group come up with those 6 Cs, was that independent of the student information?
No.
It was after.
After the student information? And so then
It was a sort of a response to that and other things.
you distilled the student information into the 6 Cs?
We distill the student information into the learning outcomes and then into the
Okay,
6 Cs.
because I guess I would like to have more confidence in the student response rate, for example. In other words, like 230 students out of a 5,000 enrollment is pretty small. So, I mean, like, how much confidence can we put in what the students believe?
Well, I think Brittany can answer that question.
Yeah, I mean.
And I think you did a great job.
Yeah, well, I
mean,
think
like,
I would look at
when-
more the fact that when you're saying 5,000, you're saying our whole enrollment. What I'm thinking, like, 3,000 is a little bit less, but that's our ones that pay like our student fee and who are on campus. and who are-
3,000?
Yeah, it's about that right now. So, to be honest, most student enrollment is in the range of 200 to 300. That's a pretty good number for us. You have to think we are a very non-traditional campus, and most of our students are commuters, or we have someone in student government who's from Carson City right now. So there's not a lot of opportunities on our campus, unfortunately, for that. If you actually look at the survey and the responses, I think it's really captures the campus. It gets all types of majors, all ranges of students, all types of years. That is something that I didn't include in there. I did ask what year you are in higher education and what year you are at SOU specifically, and so it was really interesting to look at that. I don't know if Andrew already has that information to you on your drive, but.
Well, the full results are in there.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw it. But I'm just curious, how did it get exposed to the students, through email?
Oh, email, it's on the Inside SU for 3 weeks, we did tabling, and it was pushed out through all of the different like student departments and student life. And we incentivize with gift cards. So, trust me, that's like the most outreach that
Yeah.
we're really capable of doing. It's unfortunate that there's not much I can hold over a student's head to say.
No, I
"Please take
understand. I
this
mean,
survey."
the response rate is really hard to get
Yeah.
in all surveys, and especially at SOU.
Yeah.
So, I don't know why that is, but, I mean, I applaud your efforts. I'm not suggesting that
No, yeah.
anything, there's a problem with the methodology in that regard, but we might be planning a gigantic change based on those responses.
Dennis, I would say that the
Yeah.
student replies, oh, I just lost what you're reading. Your comment just upset me so much. My hearing. I would say that, just weighting the different responses has been fairly even.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I actually wish that some of the faculty responses had been as thoughtful and deliberate in our several efforts to try to get that information. So,
Well, I agree with all that.
but I think they're all weighted, and then there'll be opportunities for even more feedback to come in as well. This isn't the end of the
Yeah,
feedback.
and that's what I would, suggest, or just be, in relation to your comment, or maybe more that you could do with students, and more contact, the more outreach. In other words, like that, maybe you shouldn't consider that part done on your behalf. Continue
something we
to ask the
also-
same survey, go, like the way we did student evaluations, we might not have gotten as great response on our student evaluations until they made it part of the course, at the end. That's when we really got good percentage feedback, right? So,
Something we talked about earlier, I don't remember, at the end of the year, so I talked about it, I believe Andrew and Carlin and I, that we would do more focus groups as well. A big part of how we were gonna structure the survey was on the table, and so we talked about also doing like more focus groups with students and getting more like senior, junior level students who have been here for 4 years, and talking to them about their experience. But to be honest, I think looking at all of the responses, it is 250, but it seems like every recipient basically said that they wanted to see change in the model, and they were not exactly satisfied with the current funding, the current the current general education model. And I think that goes to show that they want to see change. So the next step is when we're talking about models, we're then keeping up that conversation, which we definitely intended to do if we can.
But I would also say that 280 responses isn't as bad as I think you might think as a sample. When we did the CLA, we got 100 students that were graduating and 100 that were entering. And that was the sample, and it was a representative sample that nationwide they were using as a sample. 100 students out of this to measure whether we were doing an effective job in teaching what we were supposed to be teaching. When we do our assessment of student work samples, we're doing about 72, which is a representative sample from all of the departments out there.
So we have
I don't think
data
280 is
points. We have
quite that.
EC and other things
Yeah,
that we can triangulate with.
Right, so all of those different things, it's like a dipstick in, and it's not looking at your whole oil tank at that point. And I think it's, you know, if you did another 280, I don't think it would be
Survey
right.
methodology would probably disagree with you.
So we can maybe bring the survey methodology conversation maybe outside of Senate, but Alina?
I wanted to respond to Paul's question and say that one of the things on our agenda for the very beginning of next term, our work on this committee, is to talk about the multiple ways that we're going to be seeking feedback for the models question. And so the opportunities to provide that feedback are going to be myriad. We just don't have them in place yet.
Thanks.
That's on the agenda.
Right. And that question will be different for different departments, I think, in some ways.
Yes.
Can I make some closing comments? Maybe a closing comment? First of all, I want to thank the task force. I know it's a huge amount of work, and I really want to thank everybody. It seems very thoughtful. I think the dialogue with the students is good. We can do more, we can continue, but I think you guys have made a wonderful first start on this, and just really, really grateful to all of you for your work, and I look forward to, seeing what comes next. My other thing I wanted to say is unrelated, mostly, but not entirely. I just wanted to let everybody know it's not that. The National Association of Scholars, which is a conservative think tank group, did a study of what they call social justice education. And they profiled 60 universities, and we're one of them. They're condemning us, of course.
Someone's paying attention.
So there's only 2 universities in Oregon that they profiled, and one is Pacific University and the other one is Southern Oregon University. So you may be hearing something in the press. I don't know if it's going to get any attention. I spent time going through it. Just read the executive summary. You can Google. It's called Social Justice Education National. It's just horrifying to my ears anyway. But it does pick on our vision, mission, values, as well as our sustainability programs, our social justice. So we can be proud. But because I believe that these are really values that are really close to our campus, I did want to make people aware that it's a little bit of an attack on that. And we should think about whether we want to be prepared to make a response, or we just want to go those people again and sort of ignore it.
We should market it.
But I want you to know, that's actually, I mentioned it to Jody, and she said, oh, that sounds like good marketing.
Yeah.
But I want you to know that I'm not ignoring it. So just FYI.
I think marketing is absolutely the way to go. One of the subjects of my research in burlesque has been condemned by the, what is it called, the 600 Club? The 700 Club, whatever they are. 700 Club, and she markets that, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think we should.
Especially that organization.
All right, well, thank you all for your time this week. Again, please do not forget what you've heard today. When you come back in winter term and talk to your colleagues in your programs or just walking around campus, have these conversations and continue to give feedback. So with that, you're adjourned.
Thanks,
For the call.
Happy finals week, y'all.
Thanks for getting back to me.
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry, I gave her your name.